Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Group. It's the Monday main event. We do this every Monday, 5 p.m. Mountain. And we talk about real estate, focus on creative real estate, agreements for sale, rent to own, fix and flip, that sort of thing. We bring on experts to help us out: finance, insurance, development, tax, CMHC. We've had some great sessions, including a couple recently with Garth Chapman and Neil Shopsowitz on the new CMHC MLI Select program, which is very popular right now. And we also do, Donna and I, my wife Donna and I, do focus workshops where we meet up live, feed people properly for a one-day event or a two-day event. And we dive deep into the nuts and bolts of creative strategies, where we have our focus team leaders come along, talk about real deals, show you all the paperwork that fits for those agreements for sale, rent to own, fix and flip, joint ventures, exercises, network. They're hugely successful events. We've just finished two. We did wholesaling in Calgary about a month ago. So that is a full day wholesaling event. That's ratcheted up from 2 hours that we used to do on wholesaling to a full day, soon to be available as a home study kit. And we did agreements for sale in Toronto, I guess a couple of weeks ago now, maybe 3 weeks. Really successful there. Agreements for sale are making a comeback in Ontario. And the next event coming up is the famous Rapid Cash event. That's 2 full days coming up here in Edmonton, May 27th and 28th. Donna will put something in the chat for you to find out about it. And that's a great event. Absolutely fabulous event. So today, though, we are going to do what we call Tales from the Trenches, kind of real life stories of people who got themselves in a little bit of trouble, how you could avoid getting yourself in that same kind of trouble. And we're going to talk a little bit about rent to own. And to help me out with this, we've got Oilers fan extraordinaire, Neil Taniguchi. Oops, sorry, Neil, sorry. Not an Oilers fan.
Go. I watched last night's game.
That was a very interesting game last night.
As a long-suffering fan, as the expression goes, I was in diapers when they last won the cup, and I will be in diapers when the Leafs win the cup again.
Now, hope springs eternal.
I'm ready to be hurt again.
Oh man. Well, but the Leafs are up 2-1, aren't they, in that series? So game 4 tonight. They've got a better team. They got more sandpaper, as the commentators like to say. A few guys who don't mind mixing up. I mean, Austin Matthews got in a fight the other night. That's the first one in his whole life ever.
Got in a fight. When's the last time you saw a fight between two 60-goal scorers? I think they said that was the first time.
Yes. Yeah, Stamkos was choked. Matthews looked like he always looks, like he's ready to have a martini and carry on with some polite conversation. But good for him, I say. Yep. Good for him. Yep. Good for him. So,
yeah.
So
it's all good fun. It's just a game.
It's just a game.
Just a game.
All right. Well, thanks for showing up and helping out, folks. I think most of you have seen Neil before, but every week we have some new people on. So, Neil, why don't you give us the kind of the Neil Taniguchi story to get you where you are today? So, yeah.
Kind of the short version.
Well, I mean, it's quite a good story with lots of wonderful twists and turns. But you say what you think you want to say, because I think how you got to where you are and how the folks who are really implementing these strategies got to where they are now is important for people who are thinking about getting started. It's important for them to hear about it.
Okay. On that note, the shorter version is, been landlording now for over 20 years. Bought our first rental property. I guess it'll be 20 years ago, literally last month, that our first tenant went in. I mean, I had rented rooms in a house. Does that count? Sort of, not really. Fast forward that to 12, it's more like 13, 14 years ago now, where you and I were at an event that was run by, that you now run. You've taken over running it. But it was the precursor to that, where we took our base of knowledge about buy and hold, you think about real estate investing these days is such a huge spectrum. And in those days, we didn't know what we didn't really know. Brandon, I feel your pain. We didn't know what we didn't know. And so we were working on, our premise when we started was that real estate for us would be our pension plan. I didn't have a pension plan, and like CPP, OIS, not a chance that that's going to cut it. So we said if we could have rental properties paid for in our lifetime, that would make for a decent pension. What happens is, and see if this rings a bell for the viewers today, is you get to a certain point, in order to add more than 1 door, 2 door, 5 doors, etc., at some point in time, A, the bank says no more, and B, from a time perspective and your cash flow, you can't replace a job, a day job, the JOB as we call it, with cash flow from normal rental properties in most circumstances. If you get a rental property that cash flows $200, maybe even $500 a month, you're doing really well. And yeah, these days, again, short-term rentals are now on the board that weren't there, but they're a lot of work and management too. So the course that we took was the precursor to Rapid Cash. And we learned concepts like agreement for sale. So again, if you are at that point, it could even be your first one. We will suggest that you may not want it to be your first one. That said, I think, Barry, you'll be able to tell us you've had students who have done their first deal purchasing a house with owner financing on agreement for sale. And because these days, with the advent of this new thing called Facebook, there's a lot of support in the community that maybe didn't exist before to get answers. So if you think about the whole focus team aspect of it, we've said that for years. If you have a question that you can't figure out the answer, there's going to be lots of times when I don't know the answer either, but I think I can find the answer within 2, 3, 4, 5 emails, tops, calls out to people. So we all hit that point where we run out of cash, as in capital down payments on properties. Take a standard $400,000, $500,000 property. That's $80,000 to $100,000 that you need to buy, or put down rather. You have to have as in your genes if you're buying conventionally. So we hit that. We hit a point, and again, we were fortunate that we got to a number of mortgages that probably couldn't be achieved today because of the way the banks have changed their rules. So there's 2 ways to add at that point. Again, conventional real estate trainers are going to say you go in one of 2 directions. You go down the joint venture route, and you get other folks to work with you, and you're the sweat and they're the equity, and vice versa. It also means that you're working the same amount of effort, but potentially for up to half of the results. If you're splitting it 50-50 and you're the sweat partner, you're doing all that work for less of the returns. So you run out of cash, you run out of credit. It led to agreement for sale. And the training was just in that perfect timing where we were bursting at the seams in terms of time. There was just no extra time in our world trying to manage rentals and cash flow. So you think about agreement for sale, we were able to add some properties to our portfolio for little to no price down, right? The late night infomercial, buy houses with no cash, no credit. Folks, that's as true as it gets. You can do that. Those deals exist today out there. And when we get a chance, we'll maybe go through some of the math on that. But then it's easy to buy. Well, it's easy to buy anything when you think about it these days. The process to buy, if you can find an agreement for sale thing, not only do you have to structure the deal going in, but one of the things that gets taught by you in courses like Rapid Cash is what are the exits? Now that you own this property, what are you going to do with it? And that can lead to what we combined those 2 strategies was we took that agreement for sale house, did some renovation on it when it was necessary, and then put it back into out for rent, but into the rent to own portfolio that we had. And why did we do that? And the major reason was, again, if you look and think about your particular market and your neighborhood, there's only a very, very small percentage of properties out there that work from a numbers perspective, right? So I'm not going to go look and buy the house across the street. I'm not buying it anyways, but you know what I mean? There's a bunch of houses in this neighborhood that just do not work as a revenue property. They don't make sense from a cash on cash return is the big major filter. And you go, no, it doesn't work. Moving that house into rent to own gives you market rent and then you collect an option credit above that. The option credit comes into our pockets today. It's not future. It doesn't go into a trust account. It doesn't go anywhere. That's cash flow. And all of a sudden we were able to achieve cash flow on properties that wouldn't have fit our regular rental, our regular buy and hold portfolio rather. So all of a sudden our cash flow got accelerated rapidly by adding on the next properties without having to worry about cash, without having to worry about credit. And yeah, we did some joint venture stuff, and yeah, we did some other stuff. And I came to your course and I learned about fix and flip. So we did our first fix and flip 4, maybe 5 years ago, and it has become a component of our business. It's certainly not the only one. So
but that's one of the key strategies, one of the key 5 creative strategies that we teach at the Rapid Cash program. But just going back to your history, so 13 years ago, you were buzzing along. You'd had some buy and hold properties, maybe starting to hit the wall, had a job, a job at the time. Discovered we were all at the Ron LeGrand course, and we quickly Canadianized what Ron was teaching. And then we all started out on the creative investing field. So that was 13 years ago for you. And, what did that do for your, the fact that you were being an investor with a JOB and were up against the money wall? I mean, how quickly did that change your life moving forward?
Well, if you want to put it in a very simple fashion, we were able to double the size of our portfolio. We had about 22 properties when we started into the Ron LeGrand or Rapid Cash type thing, doing AFS and buy and hold. And we quickly doubled that number to the 40s into the 50s. I think at peak we had 60 properties that we owned, and more than half of them at peak were in this rapid where they weren't buy and hold. They were intended to come and go away via rent to own in that time. And so all of a sudden the cash flow that we were getting from our rentals is this much. The cash flow that we're getting from our rent to own houses is this much. Linda quit her job first. She was working part-time as a teacher to help manage it. I quit my job. I was working 60, 70 hours a week in the car business as a sales manager. A lot of you know that. And I love that business, Barry. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Right. It's everything that I like. It's deal making, it's people, it's mentoring, it's all of those things. It's a good product if you're at the right store. And I walked away from that. I did it as a leave of absence because I never intended to leave, but we discovered 60, 90, 120 days in that we were floating, so to speak, that the money that I used to get from my JOB, sure, there's no such thing as it's never, you'll always like to have more showing up in the bank account on a regular basis. But that whole version of trading dollars for hours all of a sudden became very apparent that we didn't necessarily need to do that in order to build both our today as well as our retirement. And that's when we became full-time investors. So really, I credit the early version of Rapid Cash, call it Ron LeGrand because that's who it was. But before you took it over and Canadianized it and put the right touches on it to make it work here even better, that's the rocket fuel that took us from being, we had rental properties that were going to service down the road, to going today, which is now this fall will be 10 years since we moved into the full-time sphere of real estate investing.
So folks, I wanted you to hear that about Neil because he talked about loving the car business if you had the right store. Well, Neil had a BMW store, which is definitely the right kind of store.
Well, I didn't own the store. Let's be clear.
No, but you were the sales manager and kind of certainly a very visible face. So that was a good job that you loved. But your rocket fuel in the creative investing side of things enabled you and Linda to say goodbye to those jobs. And for the last 10 years, you've been able to do lots of things, lots of traveling, lots of other things that you can do when you don't have that 60 to 70 hour a week job that you had. Even if you have a 40 or 35 hour a week job, when you got the kind of cash flow that you can get from your buy and hold and then your creative portfolio, that's freedom.
It's not perfectly passive, right? The people who tell you that real estate investing is passive. No, everyone who's watching this show knows that It's not passive that you have to work on it.
Not at all.
What the pandemic has really shown us, what maybe real estate investors knew for a while, is that I don't have to be boots on the ground here to manage our properties. All of our properties are local to here in Airdrie, Alberta. We knew lots of folks who even today are leaving Ontario with their investment monies and coming west or going south and heading to other markets because Ontario has some, let's just say, some challenges around how they implement the RTA, or the residential tenancy, whatever version, their official name of it, the LTB, the Landlord Tenant Board there. I spent a little bit of time after your course. I was talking with Christian Spilfogel, and he has a big enough portfolio there that he was talking about how they manage their LTB process, so that he says rarely is it this 8 months of no rent that you hear about in the extreme, but it is definitely that time frame to get to an actual hearing. But keep working with your tenants. I'm way off on a tangent on the tangent.
All right, so we're now going to move into some of our kind of tales from the trenches that we like to do, and then before we finish off tonight, we're going to come back and talk a little bit about a bit about that creative strategy called rent to own. You and I are doing a show tomorrow for the Real Estate Investment Network. We're going to dive deeply into the rent to own strategy and talk about really nothing else for an hour or so. But I want to give folks a little precursor of that in case they want to show up tomorrow and get a few more details. So that'll be near the end of our hour tonight. But let's get into some kind of basic things that all investors should know about. We always talk about investing that you need a team, you need a good realtor, you need a good lawyer, you need a good accountant, you need a banker or a mortgage broker, you need a team. But on the other hand, you can't leave everything to your team to do everything. And it's important for you to know about some of the nuts and bolts about how real estate deals fit together and the problems that you can run into and what you can do about those problems. So in that regard, one of the things that we talk about on the diligence side of things, because you always have to accomplish enough diligence when you're thinking of buying a property, you have to accomplish enough diligence to be able to make a buying decision. Yes, I'm buying. No, I'm not buying. And when you get to that stage, that's called having done your due diligence, once you can make that decision. But one of the really valuable pieces of diligence that you can do when you're thinking of buying a property is to, when you're serious about a property, get a copy of the title to the property, copy of the title. So we're here in Alberta, and you can go on the Alberta Land Titles website called SPIN2, that's a Roman numeral 2. And for, I think, $10, you can order a copy of the title to any property that you have the legal description for. And once you get that title, you can get a copy of anything at all that's registered against that title, a mortgage, an easement, a restrictive covenant, because all that information is public information. So it's readily available, inexpensively. And now, when do you do that? Do you do that for every property that you're mildly interested in? No, I don't think you do that. You wait till you're quite interested in a property, probably ready to make an offer. You're ready to write a contract. So that we're talking about Alberta here and notices, but every province has their own way of getting title information. And so if you're not in Alberta, if you're in Ontario or BC or Nova Scotia, you can talk to your own lawyer or realtor there about how do I get information about a title. And you can get pretty good information about titles and what's on them in most of the provinces. So what could be on a title? We had a client who was selling his condominium, and we got a copy of the title, and there was this thing called a writ of execution registered against the title, a writ of execution. So in Alberta, a writ of execution, usually abbreviated to writ, they just say there's a writ on the title, comes from when somebody has sued the title holder. Somebody's gone to court, sued the person who owns the property, gotten a judgment against them, They've won in court. And then once you win in court in Alberta, you can file this thing called the writ against the title. And that binds the title for what the seller or the owner of the property owes to the writ holder. It's kind of how you collect on your judgment. So it's a serious matter because no buyer is going to buy a property when they look at the title and they see a writ registered against it. So if you're a buyer and you're interested in a property, get a copy of the title. Maybe your realtor will get it for you. Realtors often do that when they're serious about a property. A good realtor will get a copy of the title and read that title. Read that title. If you happen to see a writ of execution registered, that could be trouble. Could be trouble. Why is that? So as the buyer, you're not going to buy that property if the seller can't get rid of the writ. In the case we're talking about here, the writ was $30,000, and the equity in the property, once the existing mortgage was paid off, was only $10,000. Oops. Writ for 30, seller is only getting 10. How's the seller going to pay off 30 when he's only getting 10? Well, he could possibly borrow some money. People might, maybe he's got somebody in his family who would lend money. Another factor in this particular case was that there was a big condominium bill owing. A $25,000 condominium deductible bill owing because there had been a flood in this condominium unit, and our client didn't appear to have the kind of insurance that would pay that $25,000 deductible. So there was a host of problems, but the biggest one we had to deal with was the writ of execution. So if you're a buyer and you're serious and you get a copy of the title, you look and you see that there's a writ of execution. Your job is to work with your realtor. You can do things on your own as well. Yourself or your realtor, maybe your lawyer, have to start digging into that writ and finding out, why is it there? How much is it for? How much equity is there going to be in this property? And will the seller be able to get rid of that writ? Because if you can't get rid of the writ, you are not buying. And so the point of this, folks, is to say you got to do a title review when you're serious about buying a property. And if there's something like a writ, what you want to do is quickly identify whether or not that's going to be a problem for you, because you can burn up a whole bunch of your time and money trying to figure this out. So the lesson here is, if you're serious about a property, get a copy of the title, review it on your own, review it with your realtor. If you don't understand what's on it and what it all means, review it with your lawyer, and don't get yourself caught by something like a writ, which, a month after you've been sweating away trying to put the thing together, it turns out the seller can't get rid of the writ because he doesn't have enough equity to pay it off. Now, there are other ways to do it, but for simplification purposes, the point is, look at the title, see if there's anything weird, and figure out whether the weirdness is going to harm your ability to buy the property before you spend a bunch of money. So that was, that's the story on the writ. Have you ever run into anything like that, Neil, when you're buying properties?
I think the only thing we've seen, Barry, is if we're looking at a property in foreclosure, is a lot of times it won't just be the bank that has filed their notice of action on the title. There may be other creditors that have also gone and, like you said, put a writ on title, and we have seen that before. So it becomes a case of trying to figure out, can we maneuver enough to buy the property and make the writ go away where it doesn't put us offside in the purchase?
Yeah.
So in the case of, once the property is through the foreclosure process and bank owned, we know those writs will disappear on their own through that's up to the bank at that point to clear them as they gain title on it. If there's any equity, the lawyers work that out with in the case of your example, where they were 10 grand short, the writ probably gets released at some point in time.
Mhm.
But if there's a condo board in there, that's a new one to me. What happens when a condo board is short paid and they're in first place? Do they take first place over a mortgage company even?
If what they're owed is in the nature of a monthly contribution or a contribution, which could be a fee, monthly condo fees or special assessments, then yeah, they get a super priority on the title. So that's a whole other ball of wax. But I just want to go back to your example of the foreclosure where you find other writs against the title. That can actually be an opportunity because anybody who's filed a writ against the title usually uses a lawyer to do it. If a property is in foreclosure and there are a couple of writs in second and third position, the lawyers and the writ holders are going, the bank's foreclosing. Are we going to get anything out of this? Are we going to get anything out of it? And so sometimes, depending on how the numbers fit, you can negotiate with those writ holders to take much less than their writ is just to get something, because they see the foreclosure looming that might get rid of them completely. But it depends how the numbers fit together. But there's sometimes a buying or it improves your buying opportunity rather than makes it worse. So writs can kind of go both ways. All right. So carrying on with titles, when you look at a title, something else that shows up fairly frequently and maybe more frequently than a writ is the builder's lien. The builder's lien. Again, every province has their legislation that allows a person who supplies labor or materials to a property and who isn't being paid to file something against the title. Some provinces call it a construction lien. We call it a builder's lien, although we're changing some of that now. So every province has that. And if you look at a title and see that there is a builder's lien filed, it's kind of the same as a writ. As a buyer, you are not going to buy that property unless that builder's lien disappears, unless it disappears. So in a recent situation, our client was looking at purchasing a property, and there was a builder's lien filed against the title, and they were trying to find the lien holder. It was, I think, a plumbing company that filed the lien. They were trying to find the lien holder. They found him. The lien guy was really rude. He wouldn't talk to him. I'll see you in court. I'm collecting every penny. And it was not going well. And our clients really, really wanted this property. So in their minds, it looks like the builder's lien is not going to go away. So when you look at a title and it's a builder's lien, here's a really key bit of information for you. It's a key bit of info. And that is that when somebody files a builder's lien against the title, they have 180 days to start an action on their lien. The builder's lien isn't a judgment. It isn't the end of it. It's just the supplier or the tradesperson saying, hey, this guy owes me money. But in order for the supplier or tradesperson to do something, they have to file a statement of claim. They have to start a lawsuit. The builder's lien doesn't start the lawsuit. It just puts a clog on the title to give the supplier a chance to do that. So our client was really worried about the lien being there, and was the owner going to be able to get rid of it? And so he brought the title to me, and we looked at it, and I looked at the date that the lien was filed, and it was, as I recall, it was about 7.5 months previous. 7.5 months previous. So the rule is that the lien holder has to start his legal action within 180 days of filing the lien. We're at 7.5 months, which is longer than 180 days. So I was able to say to my client, don't worry, we can make this lien disappear without going to court. All we have to do is send a note to the land titles office that says, here's the title, here's the date, There's been nothing filed. Here's a copy of the court records. Please discharge the lien. And so my very, very nervous client was extremely happy to hear that. And what that does now is, for anybody listening, if you're looking at a title and you find a builder's lien, you're going, oh my God, I won't be able to buy. You just have to do some math. Look at the date the lien was filed. If it's over 180 days and you have to do a little more checking to see if an action has been started, then you can make that lien disappear. So that's a little bit technical, but if everybody just remembers when they see a builder's lien, didn't Barry talk about something with dates? I better check the dates. Then we can.
And the number of days may vary in other provinces.
Yes.
Is it 180 universally? I don't know.
No, not.
And the other thing I was going to add in there is that I believe, and you probably know this number, but is it when there is a dispute where a contractor or builder believes they're not being paid, they only have 45 days from completion of work to actually file the lien. Is that right?
That's right. Now that legislation has just changed. The Builders Lien Act in Alberta, I think, is now called the Construction Lien Act, and they have just switched that amount of time that the builder has, I believe, from 60 days to 45 days or 45 days to 60 days. I haven't looked at that bit yet, but the point is that the lien holder or the tradesman or supplier only has either 45 or 60 days to file the lien from the date when they last did work on the property or last supplied materials to the property. If they go past that, then they can't file it. So sometimes they do file anyway. The land titles office has no idea when they last did work on the property or supplied material to the property. So in a lawsuit, if you can show that they filed out of time, that's another way to get rid of the lien. But your point is good, and we should say it again. Although all provinces have builders lien / construction lien legislation, all of those are different provincial laws with different bits of timing and different rules on what you have to do. So we're talking about how it works here in Alberta. If you run into these in any other province, you have to consult carefully with your own lawyer.
The concept's the same. The timeline might be slightly different, and
I would say
what they're called. Yeah,
that's probably right. Concept's the same, timing is not the same. But here's another thing about builders' liens. It's one thing to be concerned about whether the lien will disappear or not, or can you make it disappear? How long will it take? Should it be there anyway? But the other thing to think about is, as you buy, and on the diligence side, is why is the lien there? Why is it there? So, I mean, very often the lien is filed because the owner didn't pay the supplier or the tradesman. So, and it could be, you said the job was going to be 50,000 and you want to charge me 60,000. I'm not paying. So they're having a dispute about money, not necessarily about work. So you have to investigate. Can you get rid of the lien? Number one. Number two, what's the lien all about? If you investigate and you find it's just a money dispute, that's one thing. But if you investigate and find it's the owner saying, oh my God, I didn't pay you because you're the world's worst plumber, according to the other 3 plumbers and the home inspector I hired to come and check your work, this would never pass muster anywhere. So you did such a terrible job, I had to pay someone else to fix it, so I'm not paying you. Or I'm thinking about getting someone else to fix it. So I'm really worried about where it's a quality question. And if it's a quality question, that's another whole level of diligence that you would have to do as a buyer before you were happy. If the owner is really unhappy with the plumber, you've got to get your home inspector, probably your own plumber in there, depending on what the work that was being done. If it was more than plumbing, let's say it was, let's say it was a home that needed a beam because you were taking out walls, or a second story was being added, where these need to be engineered things, where you need to have a professional engineer look at it, do some drawings, put his stamp on it in order to make sure it's right. If the dispute is that the engineer says, whoa, this house could fall down. I mean, you may want to run away from that. So for builder's liens, you got to know about timing so that you can see what's going on. And you have to know about quality of work and make sure you don't get bit by a bad quality job, even though the lien might disappear. So we have a question here. Sean says, does the 180 days start from the date on the lien or the date registered, up to 4 months at land titles? Good question, Sean. Good question.
I'm going to guess it starts on the date they file, because they've amended land titles here in Alberta now to at least show there's a pending registration that didn't
Pending
show
registration.
when this backlog first started. You could be flying blind and not know something was coming. So you might know the timing on when that started, Barry. I don't see how the slowdown at land titles, Sean, is ever going to give that contractor or builder an additional time allowance to start their action. But again, I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, because we have the pending registration queue. So folks, right now it takes 4 months about 4 months. If we send something to our land titles office today to be registered, it takes 4 months for, let's say Neil's buying a property and I send a transfer of land to the land titles office that's supposed to change the title from the current owner into Neil's name. That's going to take 4 months to get registered. Other provinces go, what are you talking about? We have instant electronic registration like BC and like Ontario. But we don't have that in Alberta, although we're moving toward it. So I believe the time is counted from the date of the lien, not from when it gets registered, because of the pending registration queue. If you order a title here in Alberta, if there's anything that is into land titles that is going to be registered, but it's not done yet, you can see on the title that it is in the queue waiting. So as soon as you see that, you do some investigating and find out what that is. In the case of the person who filed the lien, they file it at land titles, the time starts running, and then the 180 days will get counted, and they could file what's called a certificate of lis pendens, or lawsuit pending, as they call it in plain English in other provinces. And that would also go into the pending registration queue, and it would easily be done within 180 days, so you can see that the action was preserved. So writs and builder's liens are things that a careful buyer might see when they get a copy of the title, when they're serious about buying a property. And then these are some comments on why those are important things for you to look at and to understand and to nail down, so that you don't get caught in a spiral of time wasting and money spending that doesn't help you in the end, or where you don't get caught buying a property where the job done by the nasty plumber is so bad that it impacts your property purchase. So that's builder's liens 1, builder's liens 2. Neil, have you ever had to make a title insurance claim?
We have not.
No?
Yeah. We buy title insurance on everything because we just don't ever want to be in that position of having to cover that. Typically, if it's in our world, it's around compliances with land use bylaw and stuff like that is probably where I'm looking for the protection on it.
Yes.
So we have not had to do it. I know you talk back and forth occasionally with Jim, who's our lawyer. Mm-hmm. And I know that Jim has seen some claims go through, and some of them are big.
Some of them are big. And so folks here in Alberta, we have a land title system that guarantees title. So if you get a copy of a title here in Alberta, you are 99.9% certain that what you see is what you're going to get, and that there is no other interest or person who's going to claim against the title. If they're not on the title, then they can't come out of the woodwork and get you. So that's in Alberta, and it's called a Torrens land title system, and we have versions of that across a lot of Canada. But in many places, they don't have that kind of a guaranteed title system. They have just a registry system where there's a central place where things can be registered. But those registry folks do not look at the documents, and they do not decide whether they're appropriate or fileable or whether they do the job they're supposed to be doing. All it is a place to record. And sometimes people have interests that they don't record. So that's the way it is in a lot of US states. And so in places like that, you need title insurance. So there you'd be buying a title insurance policy to make sure no one's going to come out of the woodwork and say, you know what, my grandpappy gave me that house, I just never quite got around to registering, in which case you'd be having a fight. So the title insurance guys, when they got to Canada, had to pivot and say, okay, well, if we're not insuring the title, because lots of places in Canada have guaranteed title, what are we going to do? So as Neil said, there can be issues around city bylaws, permits, compliances, illegal suites, and title insurance covers those kinds of things rather than guaranteeing title, or rather than being needed to guarantee title. And so what we recommend now, and I'm pretty sure what your lawyer Jim Hassett does, is the contract says a seller is supposed to provide a real property report and compliance. Real property report in other provinces, I think all other 9 call it a survey certificate. Yeah. Somehow Alberta calls it a real property report. I don't know why. But the contracts in Alberta at least say that the seller has to provide you with a real property report and something called a compliance, which sorts out the issues that Neil was talking about. But sometimes sellers don't have that. And so we always recommend that whether a buyer is getting a real property report and compliance or not, that they also get a policy of title insurance. Why do we do that? For a number of reasons. Firstly, it is cheap insurance. For a basic property, a basic single family home, maybe with a secondary suite under $500,000, you can get a title insurance policy that covers the buyer, and if they have a bank, it also covers the bank for about $250. And that is a one-time premium. You pay it when you buy, and it lasts for as long as you own the property. As long as you own the property. It lasts for the bank as long as they have a mortgage on the property. So that's one good thing, or two good things. Not very expensive, and it is a one-time premium, and it lasts for as long as you own. But the other thing that it does, and what Neil was talking about, is it can cover you for really expensive situations. So you're buying a piece of property, and there's a secondary suite in the basement. The seller says, listen, I got a permit for that. And you go, okay, well, that's great. He might provide you some information on whether there is a permit. And you know what? There it is. He got a building permit. He got a development permit, and it all looks in good order. You buy the property, and 6 months after you move in, the city bangs on the door, say, Mr. Jones? Go, no, my name's Taniguchi. Who's Jones? Oh, well, Jones used to own this house, and he applied for permits, building permit, development permit for the secondary suite. And we've been by a couple of times to do our final inspection, but we haven't ever been able to do it. But we're here today, so we want to do that final inspection. They come in, they look around, and they go, you know what? You lied on your permits. You lied saying what you were going to do. Then when you did the work, you obviously had substandard people doing the work for you. So we wouldn't pass this plumbing and electrical ever. And so, sorry, you're going to have to either redo all this work and have us come back, or you're going to have to take out the secondary suite. Take it out. So we had a client just last week who was in that exact situation, that the secondary suite was essentially illegally installed because it didn't get its final inspection. And since the cost to fix the suite would have been just, wouldn't have paid, wouldn't have worked, he got rid of it. And made a claim to title insurance, who came along and said, okay, well, that wasn't something that you could have known. Maybe you should have followed up on the permits a little bit more, but you didn't, and you didn't know. So we're going to pay the $42,000 that you had to pay to decommission that suite. So 42 grand is what it saved that client. The second thing on the title insurance perspective is that there's a lot of fraud going on now. Fraud in the real estate business is on the up. In Ontario, in 2022, they went from having 1 or 2 cases of fraud to having 30 cases of fraud, 30 cases. And this is big for title insurance guys, because in Ontario, I believe almost all deals close with title insurance. And so the title insurance guys are really choked about the amount of fraud that's going on, but they haven't said, we're not going to cover that anymore. So if you're wondering what kind of fraud goes on with homes, especially in Ontario, what happens is that fraudsters discover when somebody is not in their home. They're off on an extended holiday. We talked about titles being public information. If a fraudster discovers a property like that, they then get a copy of the title, and they look at it and they go, oh, look, how lucky for these people. They paid off their mortgage. There's no mortgaging on the title. It's a clear title. Or, oh, look, they got their mortgage 20 years ago and it was $150,000. This is $1.5 million property all day long. So now fraudsters know that there's a ton of equity in a piece of property. They produce fake ID, which needs a total expert to be able to tell it's fake ID. They either themselves, if they're good enough at it, or hire actors who walk on the wild side to impersonate the owners of the property, And then they go into a bank and they go, you know what? We're going to do a giant renovation to our house. We almost paid off our mortgage. We got lots of equity. We need a mortgage for, $500,000. So the banker goes, oh, that's great. Property's worth $1.5 million. Your current mortgage is $100,000. You've got a 1.4 million worth of equity. You want $500,000. How fast can we give that to you? So they get the money and off they go. Or sometimes they sell the property. Fire sale. Going fast for 1.2 million. They get 50 calls. They pick somebody who won't do any diligence, and they sell quickly to them using their fake ID. They collect 1.2 million of the 1.5 that it might be worth, and off they go. And there's been 30 of these cases in Ontario in 2022. So title insurance will in Ontario cover you as an owner if that happens. It works a little differently in Alberta, but there's a great reason. Fraud and permit situations are 2 major reasons why you would want to buy title insurance on every property that you have, no matter where you are in Canada. So that's what I wanted to say about title insurance. Glad you never had a claim, Neil. That's good.
Glad we never had a claim.
Yeah.
In your case where your buyer had to put the claim in, do you know if the insurance company goes after the seller?
As long as the seller is not complicit, then they don't. There's no liability on the. Sorry, you mean the owner of the property?
The previous owner for making a false declaration that says this.
Oh, sorry, I was on the fraud side of it. This is on the permit side of things.
Yeah, the seller said this is fully permitted and done, and I
don't know that.
If we pulled permits to get this done, then technically they didn't lie.
I don't think they can do that because there's no, as they say, privity of contract between the title insurance company and the previous owner.
Okay.
I don't think they can enforce that. All right. I'd like to chat a little bit, Neil, about the Rapid Cash program coming up and the component my producer is looking at me here, the component of that program that's called rent to own. Because that is one of the 5 major components of Rapid Cash. And as I said earlier, you and I are going to do a session tomorrow with the Real Estate Investment Network, an hour long on rent to own. But rent to own was a revelation as well, wasn't it? We learned more about agreements for sale in that first Raw on the Ground course, and we kind of started we started our creative strategy kind of upgrade from then. But rent to own has come to the fore as a wonderful strategy. Give us the Neil Taniguchi definition of what a rent to own is and how that's fit for you in your real estate business.
The example that I have come up with to maybe go through a little more detail tomorrow was when we first started. We were just coming out of that meltdown of 2008, 2009, which created a bunch of bank-owned properties. So I'm going to then bring that forward to today that says, given what's happened in some markets with some price drops and also with increasing rates, interest rates, and some people who may not be in trouble today as homeowners, but may end up in trouble in the next 6 months to 2 and 3 years as their low rate mortgage matures and then has to be renewed into a higher rate, or people who already are on variable. There are some people who unfortunately are in situations where their payments have become unaffordable in their mortgages. So in our case, it was coming out of the 08-09 meltdown where a bunch of properties got handed back to the banks. They were in foreclosure. So our kind of cookie cutter version was that we would buy one of these properties. They were listed for about $350,000. We'd spend 10, 15, and probably not 20,000 lipstick type stuff, paint, flooring on it. So from 350, we were in it at 370. We were very confident we could put that house back on the market at 400,000. That the after repaired value, or ARV as we call it, was 400,000. So again, you listen to that. If you're trying to do flip, you can't do that because that house, by the time you pay your carrying costs and your realtor, you have at best traded 4 quarters for a loonie. Like, you haven't made any money whatsoever. But we would then take that property and, well, tomorrow we can talk about refinance. You could refinance the property, quite frankly. So now if it appraised at 400, we had a $320,000 mortgage against it. So if you think about how much money we had in that property, our original 350 and 20 is 370. We got 320 back. We only had $50,000 in a $400,000 property instead of the standard 80,000. And I apologize for numbers without charts. But a 350 house spent 20 on it's worth 400. We would roll that. So we created 30,000 of equity there. We then would roll that out into a rent to own program on 2 years or 3 years in a flat market for 414.9, maybe even 419.9, depending on that. So we just push it a little bit above market value to say, if the market bumps, then we can make that work. And again, Sean will be the only person, maybe I shouldn't say that. There might be other people on watching who are aware of Emily. And Emily, if it's in the range of that, would approve auto, the mortgage on it. So we knew that there was a good chance that people would get approved on rent home. So really, we created 30,000 equity, marked the property up $15,000 to $20,000. So there's $45,000 to $50,000 of gross profit in there. We're also getting mortgage pay down in that 2 or 3 years time. So call it $5,000, $6,000 a year. So add in another $15,000, $16,000. So 30 and 20 is 50, about $65,000 of profit on that. Mm-hmm. And then I'll step out of our model right now that says, by the way, if you're in a market where you believe, for years, the BC market was fairly good and the Ontario market was fairly good, other than in the 90s when everyone walked away from their deposits in Toronto. I remember those times. And right now the Toronto market's down again. I'll comment on that later. If you were to take that $400,000 house today, we had to go buy the house at a discount. We had to figure out the agreement for sale side of the purchase. We talked about the start of the program because the cash and credit side, we couldn't buy the house any other way. So that helped us. But bring that forward, we also couldn't go buy that house in rent to own. There's property first, there's tenant first. And in property first, which is what we do, we go get the property, we find a buyer, a tenant buyer for it, rent to own person. In tenant first, you qualify the tenant and send them shopping. If you were to take that same $400,000 house in a market with reasonable expectations of appreciation, you mark that property up. So take that $65,000 profit we just talked about, and if you mark the property only up about 4%, in the first year you made that same $15,000, $16,000. In the second year you made another 16,400, 16,600, whichever the math is. In the third year, if it goes that long, there's 17,000. So you could add another $33,000 to that profit. And I think I was at 65, rounding it off. You got, you're close to $90,000 to $100,000 gross profit on the rent to own deal. And it's a guaranteed purchase if they qualify, which they all don't. But if they qualify, it's a guaranteed purchase. There's no realtor fees in it because you're selling it directly to them. There are some challenges around getting them approved. We'll talk about that not tomorrow, but at the course. So it's not just something where you can just go, let's go do this. There's definitely some steps and due diligence and like everything that you have to take baby steps and figure out a process and then keep refining it from there. The biggest part of all this that we haven't mentioned, though, I think we talked about it early in the show, is that same $400,000 house that I would never buy to put into my regular rental portfolio. You can probably get a cash flow on that. By the way, I said we had $50,000 left in that house, folks. We would take a down payment from don't ever call it a down payment. Strike that from the tape. We would take an option deposit from the tenant buyer because the word down payment can imply that they have equity. We'll talk about that in the course at the end of May. So we would take an option deposit from them. So that would actually go back against our original money that we had in there. So we could have even less money sunk into that property, which then if you're working on return on investment runs that number up. For us, it was more cash in the till. And then you're getting cash flow monthly because folks are your tenant buyer is giving you rent, and then they're giving you money above rent in additional option credits as they go, because it's a forced savings plan towards them. So that's a lot of words, but in other words, it's a way to take a property that, bottom line, like it says right there, it's a way to increase your bottom line by buying a property that exists in a greater number than true rental properties. I think the number one challenge for a lot of investors is, I can't find anything that cash flows. I can't find anything that cash flows. Yeah. You can create a cash flowing property via rent to own. If you have one in your portfolio that, oh my God, my variable rate went up 3 and 4 points and my mortgage payments, I'm $300 underwater, you could turn that into a positive cash flow asset.
That's so powerful to folks. I just, Neil said it a couple of times. I'm going to say it again. We're talking about a property that he is applying the rent-to-own strategy to. We're talking about a property he would never buy and put it in his buy and hold portfolio because he can't make it work. He can't make it work. But so if you can acquire that property for little or no money down, you can turn that into $100,000, depending on what the market is like, where it was worthless as a buy and hold. When you get option consideration up front, when you get extra option consideration every month because the tenant buyer has to save enough that would turn into a deposit so that he can get a mortgage. So you get money at the beginning, you get money every month, you get mortgage pay down, you get above market rent. You can add in a flat market, you can add something to the price of the property over and above market. And in an expanding market, you can, when markets are going up 10% per month, nobody minds if you say, it's a 3-year rent to own. So the way we're going to work this is your price at the end will be going up 4% per year, not 10% per year, 4% per year. And buyers are incredibly happy about that. So those 5 things that we mentioned turned, in Neil's example, turned into $90,000 to $100,000 that is going in your jeans at the end of a 3-year rent to own. So that's kind of like creating roughly $100,000 out of nothing. and a kind of a bad property to start with. It's alchemy. You're turning lead into gold.
It certainly allowed us to expand our horizons. And like I say, we've had properties where we had tenant buyers who were paying us $2,500 per month option credits over and above rent.
Yeah.
That's cash flow, folks. That's $30,000 a year into your jeans. You have to make sure that you almost don't have to put money back out when they qualify at the end. But that, again, is a minimal. It's such a rare circumstance that I shouldn't have even brought it up today.
So, folks, if you're interested in hearing more about rent to own and you want to hear it fast, show up to tomorrow night. Listen to the Rain broadcast. I'm sure Donna has put that info in the chat about where you can come and listen to Neil and I tomorrow.
It's in the chat, and I think it's also in a separate posting in the group.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the information is there. And then we've also, Donna's giving you some further details about how to get more information on the Rapid Cash program coming up on May 27th and 28th. Best creative investment program you will ever take anywhere. Guaranteed.
It is a way to supercharge your real estate investing business. And quite frankly, at the end of May, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the garden center? No, come to Edmonton. Hit the garden center on your way home. And really the investment in yourself, people, and in your time if you've never been to one of these courses, and I know there's some people watching who have, and if you have, please put it in the comments. The depth of material and research that gets given out at these courses, that isn't even part of the actual course, because nobody wants to be read a manual, but the manuals and the material that are there, it's life-changing what a course can do for this. Why am I the only person who happens to be on the show tonight? Because I'm back in town, but Dean, who took this strategy and has done some rent-to-owns and has done lots of agreements for sale. Where's Dean today? Well, he's in France, right? And he had his own business, an independent used car dealership. And he said to me the other day, he's like, I'm tracking for an incredible year in strictly doing agreements for sale. And he's doing very few rent-to-owns. He has a few, and he's turning around and reselling the house off agreement for sale. And I know I can think of a couple other people, focus team members and more, people who aren't on the focus team, who have really been able to take the materials that we're taught here and then implement them. It's one thing, if you have that book on the shelf, folks, time to blow the dust off it, because the market is upon us. There are a lot of people who bought a house for $400,000 or $500,000 in every market in this country, darn near, who are stuck today. And that's why it's great timing for this program.
Yeah, we can help people out. We can solve problems. We can be like Dean, who's staying in a hotel across from the Palace at Versailles. Don't you know? You know, I don't know if there maybe is a more expensive hotel on the planet than there. I mean, I love to say this. He volunteered this information that the agreement for sale strategy, just that one strategy for him, has turned him $500,000 since he took the course, and he only did it a few years ago.
2019, I think.
2019.
We jumped in a car together and drove to Red Deer. I had known Dean through the business prior to that, and I knew he had dabbled is not the right answer and the right word. I apologize, Dean, if you ever watched the tape. He had some buy and hold holdings, but like the rest of us, it was not going to make a difference in his today. And what it has done for him by going, and he wasn't even sure he wanted to come to Red Deer. I'm like, man, what do you like? Come to Red Deer. Cheryl, you've done it on Zoom. Are you coming to Edmonton? We'll see you there. I see it in the comments. Come to Edmonton, because sometimes to go through the material the second time there is when you start to go, oh.
Yeah.
And again, the shifting market around us is a perfect opportunity.
Perfect time. All right, Neil. Well, thanks a bunch for coming on. It's always fun doing these shows. Holy Skull. Well, we'll cheer for them until we hit them in the next round when we come through. When they beat Boston and we beat Colorado,
we'll see you in the finals.
Thanks, Neil.
And thanks everybody. Tomorrow.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.